think that the danger of media is not necessarily the proliferation of sex and violence, all the things that are mostly covered by people who critique media and maybe people who are academically trained to do so, who, may have a better expertise. But based on my own intuition, what is inherently dangerous about the mass media, let's say like network television and all of the network news stations in particular, is a promotion of a material reality and a promotion of a material world that does not leave open other states of consciousness and other potentiality to enter into other worlds that we know exist and that human beings have contacted and
Right.
have been able to travel to. Um, and outside of all the other dangers and the general kind of noise that exists and the pollution, in a sense, of what mass media is all about, just the magnification of all of humanity's really awful qualities,
Hmm.
and not covering the other stuff too. Um, and I think it's important to talk about because it leads to a control of consciousness itself, and it leads to a control of subjectivity as well. And when you limit conceptual mode of thought, and in particular in its relation to language, because there is a certain language that's used as well, you start to eliminate potentials and possibilities that
Right.
we have access to that we're not sure that we have access to. And when those realms aren't open to us and they're not focused on or covered at all, it it leads to a kind of devastating psychic situation.
Yeah.
And
With no ability
yeah,
to reintegrate these lost aspects, it's kind of like a downward spiral. It's kind of it's interesting. Mcluhan kind of comes to mind. The medium is the message. Um, with the television screen, it's a
yeah,
tube, it's a tunnel, and what do you get? Tunnel vision, and it's kind of like this tyranny of one particular reality that we all adhere to that just is given to us. So yeah,
yeah, one-way media.
yeah,
It's not a media that you could actually interact with. And I think there's been a lot of promotion too on media that you can interact with. I think the popularity of three-dimensional images has contributed to that. It's sort of this void that needs to be filled. So people, I think, are recognizing and waking up to the fact that they're only being communicated one way, but then there's also a kind of divergence too that happens when you start promoting 3D media, which wants to fill that void of you're in it more, you're interacting two-way, but it's not fully there. Like it's not going to provide that experience, and that's certainly one of the things that we're willing to create to open up that media structure that does allow two-way communication.
hmm
Um, And Mcluhan's really interesting too, like understanding media, because he started to talk about how when you extend a part of yourself, and he used the example of like watching TV is equivalent to renting out your organs, your sensory organs, to private corporations.
hmm
And he was, as much as he promoted like the global village and that kind of thing, there was also a darker and a more serious side to Mcluhan's relationship to technological critique that I don't feel is totally assessed. And John Ebert really alerted me to that other side of the hyper serious, really, you know, critical aspect of thought, which is when we engage with these things. I mean, he said things like, when we engage with technology, it constitutes an auto amputation. Like, I mean, he was a sort of deadly serious
yeah,
character. Um, and I think he meant that when it starts to dominate us, when technology starts to dominate us, that's what happens.
right.
So I think that's an interesting side of him that in the kind of pop approach to Mcluhan is not really spoken about.
Yeah, I mean, as much as technology can be an extension of the nervous system, it can also be a kind of like a fatal overdependence, of one's sensory experience. And yeah, television I mean, it really has been sort of like to put it in kind of sociological terms, very hegemonic, very patriarchal in a sense, because it's, a top-down authority. It is a one-way
Hmm.
street. Um, and you might be able to experience that one-way street in three-dimensional, that's fun. Put on your 3D glasses, but uh, I think we're really searching for a technology that reflects the organism better, without losing whole dimensions of our sensory experience to the technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the mythological consciousness, that state that we're
Sorry.
trying to constantly interact with, that mode of being that is a kind of dreaming, like a mythological dreaming, that occurs when you're in a dark theater, like the cave. Ebert always talks about this, like you're really in that mythic mode, and there's a void being filled, but it's a void that is being filled by when you have Hollywood and when you have other kind of hyper capitalistic enterprises, they're not going to necessarily be making stuff that's gonna uh, make you think about other potential reality
No, not at
structures,
all.
and that's just why would they?
Yeah.
So, and not to say like well, there are Hollywood films that have been really interesting in the past, but you know, if you live in a culture that doesn't have that potential to deliver the goods, the other forms, and those forms aren't made popular, I mean, we have that now, but the artists that are doing it are really struggling and not getting support. Most of them, I mean, even David Lynch, who's been a filmmaker for 30 years, has to fund his own films and go to other countries for funding, France usually. Um, it's a really sorry state of affairs,
Yeah.
and
And
I think.
I guess
Go
here's
ahead.
like the interesting dynamic. There's this old media, one-way street thing with sort of Hollywood as this, um, I guess, Disneyland factory of producing reality, you know,
Yeah, in
and
Thompson's terms, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and it's the whole mentality of capitalist culture. We can mass produce anything you need, and it's this mistaken idea that you can create a balanced reality like that. You can't, and it's an
Mm,
illusion. You're producing. You're eating canned soup and plastic food. It gets fake after a while. You lose
mm,
something living and becomes a machine, like we're talking about. Uh, and what I think is interesting though is within the framework of this arises this little thing called the internet, and not to like totally glorify it either, because there's a whole slew of problems that come with it too. But the internet kind of just like eats it from the inside out, and it's another kind of complexity, and it's interesting the dynamic that's going on with this established kind of factory line hierarchy, that has control of everything in our society, and this new decentralized networking form of communication. They're trying to kind of buy that too. Oh, let's mass produce that too. Let's market that.
mhm,
And this is the battle
mm.
now. This whole idea
Yeah,
of power. Um,
yeah, and it is a battle, and don't think for a second that there aren't people who are not happy about the communication that's going on
yeah,
through and with the internet,
they're
and
scrambling.
are willing to do serious things to make sure that the internet itself becomes another one-way media
Yeah.
street.